We're going to talk to Cameron, who's also calling in from Washington. Cameron, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, how you doing?
Doing good. What's up?
I have actually, because you mentioned you already mentioned hypersexuality, so I was thinking of lots of questions now. I have to mention I have struggled personally with hypersexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a horse in the race.
Sure, I hear that.
So I'm very curious. How would you define withdrawal symptoms versus like potential hangover? Like, how would you define withdrawal specifically?
I mean, I'm really not qualified to say because I'm not much of an addiction expert. I don't do a lot of work around the subject of addiction. I just know that the absence of something is different from something existing. And when we talk about some of the things that I cover in my field, which is, helping people with their romantic and sexual relationships and helping people to like study and understand their gender, I work with those types of folks, and I know that they are not experiencing withdrawal symptoms. I mean, I can tell you a little bit more broadly that, when somebody does have a substance abuse issue, that, their body is going to have certain needs for that chemical in order to reach homeostasis. And that can cause a lot of like physical discomfort as well as like meaningful medical issues. But that's a process that I'm honestly not particularly qualified to be super familiar with.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, you don't need sex to maintain homeostasis. Don't
Right,
quote me on
exactly.
that, but I think that's like the big difference.
Okay, so it wouldn't be like you're not considering like the emotional after effects of like regret and I was like a different person. I would never do those things ordinarily. Like that wouldn't.
I mean, I'm deeply concerned with them in the sense that, I work with people to try and help them grow and change and make their lives better. So that's my meat and potatoes. That's my everything. But I recognize that those things are not chemical withdrawal symptoms and shouldn't be understood in the same way. That's not to say that your emotions don't have chemical aspects. And yeah, we can like get into the nuts and bolts of how psychology works, but to confuse heartbreak, to confuse guilt, to confuse like shame and these different emotions with the experience of, craving heroin or having like heart palpitations because you haven't had anything to drink today is to really do a disservice both to people who are struggling with heartbreak and people who are struggling with addiction.
I think
it's just a bad metaphor ultimately, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, Cameron, but I think that's really the case that I mean to make here is that we might compare the two. And I mean, as a therapist, I love me a good metaphor. I mean, I will spend all day comparing something to something else, but this particular metaphor has been wrapped up in a bunch of pseudoscience, and it's not very apt.
Okay. And I also wanted to ask you about that too. So is your main issue with the word addiction then?
My main issue is with the word addiction in only the vaguest sense. Like I'm not trying to go for the headline here. Like underneath all of this is a really important distinction in the way that we might treat so-called sex addiction. If we recognize somebody as having out of control sexual behavior, we're going to operate very differently than if we think that somebody has a medical pathology with a withdrawal component. Not only that, but we're socially going to be discussing it in very, very different types of terms. And frankly, we're not going to be putting people in these like very for-profit kind of manipulative pseudoscience-y treatment centers that are honestly the only reason that you and I are even having this discussion right now, Cameron, because if it wasn't for the like propaganda and the political lobbying that these multinational corporations are doing in order to create profit generating centers where they quote unquote treat a imaginary ailment, then you and I wouldn't even be having this debate, because the word addiction wouldn't have entered your vocabulary in the way that it has. And I know that that's a big claim. I don't mean to come across as a crazy conspiracy theorist. You can learn more about these ideas by, I referenced Nicholas Baum-Harvey. I also want to mention Dr. David Ley. There are good experts who have studied, examined, and published good research on these topics.
Well, I wonder if quote unquote sex addiction treatment could look like something more benevolent if we kind of re-examined our attitudes towards sex.
No question. I mean, I work with people. I have clients come to me all the time and say, I am here because I'm addicted to sex. And it doesn't fall to me to correct them and be like, no. I'm going to take that word away from you. That's not the right word for you. I'm going to meet them where they're at. I'll be upfront about my understanding of the science and my particular expertise. And I'm not going to pretend with them that we're going to work from a model that I know to be flawed, but I'm going to have a conversation with them about what's going on in their life. Why do you think you're a sex addict? What's going on? Do you think that you're a sex addict because your partner or your parents or your culture or your society, your religion is shaming you? Or do you think that you're a sex addict because you're having sex in ways that is making your life miserable? Is it a mixture of both? What can we do about either? I mean, there are useful questions that need to be asked here, but none of those questions have anything to do with withdrawal or with the medical components of your body or the parts of your brain that light up when you look at porn. I'm so tired of people taking fMRIs and these different things and extrapolating out from such bad research and creating this entire pseudoscience to just muddy the water when there are real people having real problems that could be getting real help, and instead are spending their life savings on these treatment centers that are peddling bullshit.
Yeah, it definitely seems like they're profiting off of shame and shame culture.
No question. I mean, I guess as our friend Andrew said, we could call that a religion because they're worshiping profit. Like it's problematic, and it's a real issue that we're frankly just not very equipped to deal with. The way that we finance medicine in this country, the way that our lobbyists operate when it comes to regulating things in this country. I mean, America can't even get a ban on conversion therapy. So people can still sell that as a product in a lot of parts of this nation. It's going to be a long time before we have a meaningful discussion about something like the bullshit pseudoscience behind so-called sex addiction treatment.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to hypersexuality, though. Are you familiar with that and like the ways that manifests in different disorders?
Yeah, I mean that term hypersexuality, I like to demystify it and perhaps oversimplify it according to some people. To me, hypersexuality is literally any form of sexuality that is causing distress. That's all I care about. I don't care if you have sex 10 times a day or 10 times a year. If you are having sex in ways that feels problematic or that is causing distress in your life, then I might refer to that sex as hypersexual.
Okay. From what I've come across with people that I know and then the issues that I've experienced myself, there is an element of impulse control within disorders that have that as a feature.
Mm-hmm. Yes, lots of people have struggles with impulse control in lots of different ways and lots of different fields. I mean, impulse control is not unique to any particular like pathology. It's something that we all struggle with in one form or fashion. And again, if you have particularly poor impulse control or particularly poor impulse control around one part of your life, you could probably use some help. You could probably use some assistance in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And that help is not going to come in the form of pretending that you have some like medicalized withdrawal symptom from lack of access to sex.
Yep. Doing a thing and liking that thing and wanting to do more of that thing because you like it is not an addiction, right? I think that's kind of a good line to draw in the sand. I mean, like, again, it goes back to this conversation of just using that word. And to be fair as well, right? you can quote what that word addiction means, and what that means in 2022 is going to be maybe different in 2030 or different in 2040, because it's a developing thing too. There's still things that we're trying to that people smarter than me are spending their lives researching and figure out how to qualify it in more definite terms. But it is important to make distinctions when possible.
Yeah, and when I make the claim that sex addiction isn't real, or that it's a myth or something like that, I'm operating from an understanding that the word addiction has a specific meaning. And that's true regardless of what we're discussing. But I'm going to acknowledge here that the definition of the word addiction that I'm using may not be everybody's definition. What I'm suggesting is that we have a conversation as a society about how we use that word and why, and that we make some better choices than perhaps we have been culturally.
Yeah, it's probably not a very helpful term, especially with what it's been used to refer to with like chemical addictions, like drugs. But there is one more thing that I want to talk about, and that's specifically
real quick, Cameron, and that's all we got time for.
Okay, sorry. Specifically to do with manic episodes, because that is a chemical thing. That is something that I personally struggle with, and you do feel like you become a different person with that when that happens. And the euphoria and all of the chemicals that are influencing your brain, I think that can be addictive, and that can't be solved through something like talk therapy. That's a drug issue. That's your brain is overwhelmed with essentially it is a drug effect.
Yeah. I hear that, and I certainly recognize that sensation of feeling out of control, how powerful that can be in somebody's life, the distress that it can cause. I was in a marriage where manic episodes were a incredibly profound source of distress in our lives, and I never want to diminish all of those things, while pointing out that your use of the phrase "it's a drug issue," I mean, it's technically correct if we want to refer to a neurotransmitter as a drug, but it's not a addictive substance. And it's actually not the case that you can become addicted or have a withdrawal component or like have that lack of homeostasis for your self-developed chemical neurotransmitters. Again, I'm a clinician, and I want to acknowledge all of that. Like, I am not a biologist or a research scientist or this sort of person, but I can tell you that using an addiction model to try and understand a mood disorder harms people who have addiction, and it harms people who have a mood disorder, both of whom need our help and support, not our like casual and lazy misunderstanding, which is frankly what we see a lot of when we're writing policy and when we are setting laws.
I see. That really was my main question. If it could ever be helpful to people like that, and I think that's been answered.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you're raising these questions. Thank you so much for calling us tonight.
Yeah. Thank you, Cameron. Thanks so much. And it's good that we're talking about this, because I'll be honest, I'm more surprised than anything that more people are calling about this. I guess there are some issues in my mind that I just consider settled. And then I think like,
Sure.
oh, well, of course, other people don't always think the same way. And then I have to think about the history of my life and how recent of a development it is. And just the people I'm exposed to and the stuff that I see. It's like, yeah, this word addiction is like really not a settled thing for a lot of people. Some people think it's these different things. And we have to look to the science and see what we can say about it, and important to develop those models that you're talking about and see what's accurate in describing this phenomenon so that we can give people the best help possible for their situations.
Yeah, and ultimately, if we want to boil my entire presentation down to the idea that I'm just like policing people's grammar and like their usage of the word addiction, then I guess fine, we can do that. I just want to present the notion that there's a good goddamn reason why I'm making that case.